All right, guys, this has been by far and away the most troubled lecture series in the 8 or 9 years of lecture series history. Who knew we would have to go from hurricanes and snow and rain to the coronavirus? But here we are, doing the very best we can to finish up this series. I know many of you have been clamoring for it. So in that case, and in all this hardship, I want to thank you guys for coming to lecture series, whether you've come to one session or all of them. Skajaja, now more than ever, is one of those nice philanthropic organizations that everybody needs, or if you can, everybody needs to support. So thank you. And if you're watching this, if you haven't already, please make a donation to Skajaja. I feel like I'm one of those online pastors plugging this, but it is true. And on another note, I really want to thank Leanne Swanekamp. Leanne and I have worked together for several years now, and lecture series has undergone some transitions, and Leanne handles all the paperwork, all the accounting. She makes these flyers. She gets the National Honor Society involved. If you ever see her, or you can email her, just thank Leanne to show her the appreciation for what she does. I mean, she's the behind-the-scenes magician that makes all of this happen. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Leanne. And so with that, here it is. We are in April. It's the second week of April, and I am actually filming this on April 15th, which is normally tax day, in my backyard when we hopefully have a little bit of peace and quiet, and so you guys can actually see me. And the end of this whole saga, the Eastern Theater of Operations, the ETO, happens in April and May of 1945. So where we last left off all those weeks ago was the Battle of the Bulge, where Mr. Rober came in and read a little bit of what his grandfather was going through, and we had this great crescendo to finish, and then bam, next thing you know, we're out of school due to coronavirus. So here it is, the end of the war in Europe. And what we have going on, what a lot of people don't realize, is that famous photograph that I'll show here real fast is the Yalta Conference. And as you can see, you look at the British and the American diplomats, and you look at the Russian diplomats, and you look at Uncle Joe Stalin looking off in this direction, and Churchill and the aged warrior Churchill and Roosevelt looking at each other. These guys are kind of having a good time and happy, and these guys are stone-faced, afraid to have any little reaction whatsoever. Is not good be happy in Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, my little capitalistic Americans. So, from February 4th to February 11th, 1945, the leaders, the big three of the Allied countries, are going to meet to discuss what happens post-war Germany. The Battle of the Bulge had just concluded on January 25th. The push of 4 million American soldiers, American, British, Free French, Free Polish, Canadians, New Zealanders, were pushing towards Berlin from the west, while the Russians were coming from the west. And at this time, Churchill, the aged warrior that he is, realizes that British involvement is declining. The manpower is mostly American, the air power, the tanks, the jeeps, the trucks, pretty much everything now is predominantly American. But even with that, he has some key thoughts on how post-war Europe was going to be run. And each of the three leaders has different ideas. And so 3 different objectives are going to come out here. Number 1 is Joseph Stalin. Regardless of the Uncle Joe benevolence the Allies, portray him, he's not such a nice guy. And Stalin wanted to secure Russia and its borders. And he gives this outstanding quote. He's like, Poland Poland needs to decide whether it is going to give its life or its death for the Soviet state, meaning that Poland since 1939 is going to be an occupied territory. President Roosevelt is kind of trying to play this kind of, one foot in either camp role. Now, he is not very healthy, but he kind of wants to befriend Russia. What he wants to establish is to befriend Russia as an asset to help defeat Japan in the Eastern Theater. And he also, like President Woodrow Wilson before him, wants to badly establish a United Nations. Something to negotiate to avoid the conflicts and the horrors of what we're seeing in World War II. And last but not least, we have Churchill, who's kind of listening to this and keeping his eye on things. And Churchill badly wants, number one, to defeat Nazism in Germany. That is his number one goal. But he also wants to prevent a Soviet or a communist sphere of influence from growing, to prevent the communists from becoming too powerful. Think of his great speech at Westminster College, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, descended upon Europe as this Iron Curtain. He kind of foresees this all. So that is why you get this photograph where Stalin is looking off and Churchill and Roosevelt and their boys are having such a good time here at the Yalta Conference on the Crimean Peninsula, which coincidentally is interesting. Going back into history, into Peter the Great Romanov Russian Tsar, he attacked the Ottoman Empire trying to access the Crimean Peninsula, Sevastopol, right, on the same place where, ironically, the Black Plague broke out by, the Mongols spreading it. Now we're in coronavirus. To get access to a warm water port. He wanted to be able to ship, Russian iron to the west, but he needed a warm water port to do it. So he attacks twice in his reign and fails. And so coming back again, going into World War I and World War II, this is what Stalin wants, to have an interest in the Mediterranean and Western European affairs. The Soviet fleet was supposed to disband Sevastopol in 1999, and they are still there. So something that we keep coming, and all this happens right around mid-April, where we are at right now. So in the Yalta Conference, a couple things are going to come up. Many of you remember the famous, East and West Berlin. If you've ever been there, like the last time I was there, you could clearly tell which was West Berlin and which side was East Berlin. This little pocket right inside the heart of Soviet-dominated Berlin. And the Soviets are going to take 8 boroughs to the northeast. And the British are going to take 6 in the northwest. So they're kind of opposed. Down to the southwest is where the United States will take another 6. And the French are like, oh, what is this? No, we need to get in. And everyone is like, well, what are you talking about? You were taken over, you surrendered, you were, a collaborator with the Nazis. You don't get anything. And the Soviets say no. All right, the British have 6, the Americans have 6, we have 8. I'm not giving 2 to you to even myself up with the Americans and the British. That's just too doggone bad. And in the middle of all this is the country of Poland. Poland, and what really angered Churchill, Roosevelt allowed the Soviets to annex Poland. The Polish state was given to the Soviets. Whoop, I'm trying to be a weather person here. Since they already occupied it since 1939. The people of Poland and Winston Churchill saw this as treachery, saw this as a bad move. Roosevelt justifies it by saying, in order to get Russia to help us against Japan, we need their support. The atomic bomb hadn't been developed yet, so he really didn't think he had a choice here. This is what he had to do. And so the Pacific Theater Well, we had fought through the Battle of the Bulge and we were closing in on the Ruhr River region. Whether they were accountants or statisticians or actuaries, whoever, the Pacific projections said that in order to defeat Japan, based on the rate we were going with Peleliu, and then going into Iwo Jima of February of 1945, and then Okinawa, it was going to take until 1946, 1947, with the firebombing of Japan, which could be next year's lecture series, with the blockade. No matter what, Japan was stout. They were not going to give in. So Roosevelt wants to save American lives. That's his primary objective. Think of Grant going into the early part of lecture series this year. The quickest way to save lives is to end the war. So even at the expense of making his good buddy Churchill upset and the Polish people, and even whatever was going on with Chiang Kai-shek in China, with his battle between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, whatever it'll take to conclude the war the fastest, that's what I am in for. And so when you look at the Yalta Conference and you disseminate and disaggregate all the information, it's Stalin. Oh my God, I sound like a Lincoln Center employee there. It's Stalin who was the big victor in all of this, all right? He placed Soviet puppet governors, hand-picked guys in the East. He gets everything that he asked for, every single objective, except control of the Black Sea Straits. All right? And again, this is going to affect the world until 1989, even the modern day. When we get the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Russian fleet, by God, is still in Sevastopol in the Ukraine if you go there right now. So Stalin at this point in early February is the big victor, setting up what is to become what we know as the Cold War. It's really hard to stand in one place. You guys know I like to move back and forth, but here we go. All right. So here we got the Soviet provinces, we've got the British provinces, the American, and these two up here are going to be to the French. Britain concedes a couple of their provinces to make the French happy, rounding out the Allies and the division of Berlin and the upcoming Cold War. And so now we got the race to the Rhine River. And the race to the Rhine River is the big major river. The Rhine is this big, think of it as like the Ohio, almost the Mississippi River of Germany. All right, it's the last MLR or main line of resistance till you get into the heartland of Germany. So think of crossing the Ohio River from Kentucky and getting into like Ohio and Indiana or Illinois, or crossing the Mississippi River and hitting, everything from Iowa to Nebraska to Kansas to Oklahoma, all the way on down into the deep south. This is the heartland. And after Market Garden falls flat on its butt, and we fight through the Battle of the Bulge, Bernard Law Montgomery was attacking straight east towards the town of Wesel and Dortmund. And if you look in that region, kind of the northern region, this is the industrial sector, the beginning of the industrial sector of Germany. Think of it as like the Buffalo, the Cleveland, like Pittsburgh, almost Youngstown area. He's going straight east in one area. In the middle, in the center, heading for the major city of Cologne, was two of Omar Bradley's generals. You have William Simpson and Courtney Hodges. They've got this two-pronged assault going right at the middle. And then down south, you have our rogue hero, George Patton. Patton, by this time, has an independent command. And he's headed towards the south, toward the city of Bonn and the little town of Remagen, which has a key bridge. So you've got 1, 2, 3, and 4-pronged assault going right at Germany. And William Simpson and Patton were both West Point buddies. All right, they were there at the same time, and they were a little bit older than Dwight Eisenhower and Omar Bradley, who were a little bit younger. And they say, God, Simpson used to say, hey, George, you know, we're older than these two, but we still have to carry the ball for those two youngsters, meaning we're doing the hard work, the fighting out in front, while those two are planning it and getting all the credit. And so we get to the famous Remagen Bridge. It's a great sight if you would go there today. You stand there and you look eastward and you kind of get this chill of everything we talked about, the Siegfried Line, the Hurtgarten Forest, fighting through the Metz and that hellish, you know, contest, freezing outside of Bastogne, being there in the stone cold, the famous battle of the Elsborn Ridge, and this nasty bitterness at places like Stavelot and Malmedy. Every Allied army is trying to close on the Rhine River. But in the middle, you have this territory. It's kind of swampy. The Ruhr River is there. And the 30th Division, talked about with Pat Rover's grandfather, talked to a guy in Raleigh, an industrial reconnaissance scout who lives at a place called the Cypress, said as they crossed the Ruhr River, the 30th Division artillery, Rover's grandpa, was so accurate they walked artillery fire, you know, 10 yards ahead of us, 30 feet. So as we crossed the river, had we crossed it without them, we would have all been massacred. But they blew back the resistance and allowed us to capitalize on it. This is blitzkrieg in reverse. And all the Allied armies were trying to get across the Rhine River, but everywhere they went, it had been destroyed. The bridges had been taken out, so there was no way to get across it. And then in March 7th, all right, early on, think of just before we got out of school here, a second lieutenant of an industrial reconnaissance platoon, a guy named Emmett Burroughs, is driving a Jeep along, you know, the bluffs. He can't get too close. He gets out of his Jeep and he walks up to a river's edge and he looks across, and what do his wondrous eyes, whoops, does he see? Well, I kind of, gave it away. He sees the little village of Remagen on the east side of the bridge, and he saws the Ludendorff Bridge, named for the famous World War I general. It was still intact. He couldn't believe it. So he gets on the radio and he calls First Lieutenant Carl Timmerman, who says, LT, you got to get here quick. Why? Well, I'm pretty sure I've got a bridge. It's intact. Shut up. Don't lie to me. No, get up here quickly. But there are Germans on the other side. And on the other side, there are 3 German officers, literally, that see, Emmett Burroughs up on top, and they're kind of undecided on what they're going to do. How do we handle this situation? So here comes Timmerman up later. Burroughs takes this photo, and he's looking across this river, think of going from Ohio on I-77 from West Virginia and into Ohio. This up here would be Marietta. Here he is. Oh my God, I have this bridge. What's going on? And so Timmerman says, guys, get across that bridge as fast as you can. Get men, get tanks, get moving. Now, contrast to that, on the German side of the bridge, we have a couple of German engineers. We have Captain Karl, Frieshan, who is like, oh my God, here the Americans come. This big old railroad industrial bridge won't blow. So on his own authority, he runs up and he tries to blow the bridge. And as he pushes the plunger around 4 o'clock, poof, one of the explosives goes off. It puts a hole in some of the planks in the bridge, but it doesn't destroy it. He's like, oh crap, what am I gonna do? So he runs back and he sees Major Hans Schuler, who is in a heated argument with Captain William Bertag, and they're arguing over who had the authority to decide what to do with this bridge. Who was actually in charge? Who had the authority to handle it? And Schuler and Bertag says, wait a minute, in order for us to destroy this bridge, we need a written order from a superior. Now keep in mind, in the German army, you obeyed orders, the chain of command. You couldn't do anything unless you were ordered. The American army It was American initiative, thinking on your feet, freedom of thought. Kind of traits embedded in the American persona, from the pioneers going out west to the mountain men like Jim Bridger and Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. You solve your own problems. In the German army, you had to be told exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. So they wanted authority to cover their butts. Schuler and Bridger want this, all right? Well, our man Friesenhahn says, no, all right, this is garbage. I'm going to blow it up so they don't get their foot into Germany proper. And what most people don't remember is at the end of World War I, on November 11th, 1918, when the armistice was signed, not one foreign soldier had set his foot into Germany. It hadn't happened. So Friesenhahn turns that key, but nothing happens. At this point, all right, everyone realizes that explosives are going to have to be detonated by independent hand. Someone's going to have to go out there and do it. Well, as this argument is going on, Timmerman and his guys are running across the bridge, firing M1s. Timmerman's got his, Tommy gun fighting girder to girder, throwing hand grenades, having tanks lob shells across the river. Mortars were flaring, and as they are going by, guys are pulling apart their explosives. And on March 13th, Sergeant Alexander Drebeck becomes the first American, he is the first soldier, an American, to cross into Germany since Napoleon, over 130 years before, since Napoleon's retreat from Russia. Sergeant Alexander Drebeck makes it. He gets across the bridge. He breaks to the right. You'll see in a second this big turret. Timmerman is right behind him. Now, as the Germans were being pushed back, they just couldn't handle this American onslaught. Schuler, poor him, jumps on a bicycle. Every American sergeant who knew somebody had a Jeep, and what Hitler touted as the most mobile army in the world. My man's riding a frickin' bicycle. He heads back to headquarters to report, oh my God, what do we do? The bridge is intact. We tried to blow it up. What do you want us to do? Well, on the onslaught, the other two officers, Bertag and Frieshausen, were, they surrender. Excuse me, I'm losing my train of thought as my neighbors are running across the back there. Sorry about that. So anyway, two officers surrender. Schuler gets out. So here's the American Sherman tank coming across, breaking right up here. Drebeck is going to go up. You can barely see him. He's right here. Goes in and takes out these machine gun nests. And here is Timmerman, followed by more guys, taking out the tower on the left. And the Remagen Bridge is held up. And now we come into the love him or hate him story of George Patton. The big hole in the bridge that was blown up when Friedhausen turned the key is patched up with planking. And so now, within a day, 24 hours later, the American engineers had come by and laid a pontoon bridge, which think of like hollow, like houseboat aluminum tubes with wooden planking over it. Very similar to the planking used in the Civil War. If you remember the Battle of Fredericksburg, instead of wood, they now have metal. And Patton gets there, and Patton is pumped. He knows he's the first guy to get across this bridge. And going back to the Battle of the Bulge, he had his chaplain write a prayer in which he says, God bless it. God, we have a day of rain and a day of snow and another day of rain and another day of snow. Whose side are you on anyway? And Patton is now convinced. He's so pumped. He believes this is his mission. He is going to cross the Remagen Bridge. And he gets up early and he drinks several cups of coffee and several pitchers of water and milk. Then he walks out on that pontoon bridge in full ceremony, all by himself, completely theatrical. Sorry to be crude, he unzips his fly and urinates in the Rhine River. And he says in a loud, nasty voice, This is what I think of the Rhine River and Germany and Adolf Hitler and all Germans. And he pees for however long. The guy's like, woo, yeah, all right, General Patton. And off they go. But most people don't know that Patton has crossed the river at this time. And so we have crossed the Rhine with dry feet, courtesy of the 9th Armored Division. And here we get a look at this plane right here. This is a Messerschmitt 262, the first twin jet-powered aircraft. Americans had never seen it. We're going to talk about a guy named Felix Spatz here, or Franz Spiel here. I'm getting him confused with Karl Spatz. Franz Spiel here, who Patton is going to get to steal 10 of these planes and fly them to the American theater of occupation after the war. But these are briefly going to show up. And what we have here is the 9th Armored Division and the 4th Infantry Division, guys who landed at Utah Beach, all right, are finally making their way into Germany after undergoing the Battle of Normandy and the hedgerows and the sprint across France and the Hurtgen Forest and the retreat at the Battle of the Bulge. They're finally moving forward again. And so on March 9th, Patton's going to call Bradley and says, hey, Brad, no, I know we haven't seen eye to eye, but how are things going? Have you or Hodges or Monty have found a way across the Rhine? And Bradley says, nope, nobody's quite over yet, but Monty is getting really close. And Patton's like, oh, really? Well, do you think we should let him know that I crossed the Rhine about 36 hours ago? And Bradley's like, what? What did you just say, George? He said, well, I just want to know if you think we should let Bradley know if I crossed the Rhine River about 36 hours ago. No, you didn't. How did you do it? Well, I found a bridge over the Rhine at Remagen, and my boys are moving inland. Now, there was a testy battle on the shores of the Rhine River before we got support, but we were winning. And Bradley, he was oh so bitter at Montgomery after Market Garden and having his 9th Army taken from him during the battle, was hot dog, that'll really bunch him up. Awesome, we got this. You go, George, you go. And so the Germans are now realizing that they're in trouble. They were tired of bombing runs by plane, all right? Germany was being bombed into smithereens, so the Germans try and turn the tables. The Germans tried to bomb the Remagen and the pontoon bridge by plane. That didn't work. The Luftwaffe had been shot out of the sky. Then they tried their 88 millimeter artillery, but they couldn't get good enough spotters without American artillery response. V-2 rockets were fired at them. Swimmers with explosives were sent into the Rhine. Even the famous Messerschmitt 262 that I was telling you about tries to fly low over the river to blow up the bridge, but nothing works. The bridge remains intact. More and more and more American and Allied units are crossing the Rhine River. So the Germans don't know what to do. Now, two guys, Friedhausen and Bretagne, surrender. They're now American captives. Schuler, the poor guy who pedals his bike, all right, he gets court-martialed because he screwed up, because he went back to say and accurately describe what had happened. He gets shot and executed for allowing the bridge to be captured. So the other two officers get off better. And here's where we see the end of veritable German legend, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. He was in charge of part of the army at Normandy, where he was relieved. He was brought back when the Germans made it to the Siegfried Line. He was reinstated, and now he's done. He is fired for the second and final time, and one of Hitler's confidants, Albrecht Kesselring, is put in command of the army in the West. And his contemporaries called him Smiling Albert. Now, Kesselring was a pilot back in World War I. He took over Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron's flying circus, after the Red Baron was shot down. He was one of Hitler's guys, but he had really no infantry combat command experience. But he, in fact, was a pretty decent general, fighting, in Italy and other places like that. So Kesselring is in charge, but by this time, the United States effort was in the Ruhr River Valley. It was coming close across this flat land between the Ruhr and the Rhine River, this low-lying area where you've got Hodges and Simpson here, you've got Patton and Collins to the south, and they're, coming in, and they're coming right for the heartland of Germany. Patton was across the Rhine River, and Germany's days are now forever numbered, all right? It's about to get real for Germany. The horrific side of warfare that they haven't seen in World War I, where their crops were destroyed, where their towns in Glockenspiel were blown up. Now they are about to feel that pain amongst themselves. So here we have the capture of the Ruhr River Valley. March 28th, just a couple weeks ago, Montgomery's 21st Army Group in the north, Bradley's 9th Army, and Patton's 3rd and 7th Armies are in the north, in the center, and in the south. Boom, boom, and boom, all over the Rhine River. And as the German army was declining, here's where there are 4 million Allied soldiers, predominantly American, but we've got free Poles, we've got free French, we've got, Italian soldiers coming up, guys from New Zealand, guys from Australia, you name it, guys are pushing towards Germany. 4 million. That's an incredible amount of soldiers coming ready to deal that fatal death blow, that big uppercut, not to knock Germany out, but to put it down, are coming at it. And over in this area is General Walter Model. Now, Model is your stereotypical German, if you can remember way back in the beginning, he's that crazy guy who's got like the monocle, looks kind of like a nutter. Model had pledged eternal allegiance to Hitler. All right, I will do my utmost duty to you, mein Führer. But he makes a fatal guess at this time. He's situated in the middle. We've got Patton down here and Joe Collins, and we've got Courtney Hodges and Stimson here. They are closer, moving in a northeastern direction to the industrial heartland. They're moving this way. So Model has to take a guess, and he gambles on his defense, and he moves them to the north, to the industrial heartland, to the Clevelands and the Detroits of the area. That's his game. That's his goal. Now, it was a good thought. He was trying to block, with his last Panzer Army, the 15th Panzer, block this attack into Germany. He was going to thwart what he thought was Courtney Hodges' assault, who was what he thought was going to come straight on in this northeast route. I'll show you this map in 1 second. This puts Model way in the north, but Hodges all of a sudden swings to the south, in the southeast. And what he did was follow the path of George Patton, and as he follows Patton, it allows, Courtney Hodges, William Simpson, Joe Collins, and Patton all to link up. All of Bradley's and Patton's armies are combined in the south. Then they are going to swing out, and they are going to, they thought that he was going to keep going this direction. He was coming out of Belgium in the Bulge. He was going to come this direction, and all of a sudden, Hodges swings south. Down here is Patton. Down here is Collins. And with all of these armies combined, they encircle this area from Hanover to Duisburg to Dusseldorf to Cologne to Bonn to Frankfurt to the Mannheim. All of this area is encircled. He was going up this direction. He planted and cut, went this direction over the Rhine, and encircles all of this. And as Model made that gamble up north, where he was, he now finds himself surrounded. He's got nowhere to go except the Rhine River, a main line of resistance. More Americans, and he's got Montgomery coming this way. He's completely surrounded. He is completely and totally screwed up, and now it is about over. And if you look at this direction, if you've ever been over there, Western Germany is the industrial heartland. It's the Buffalo, the Cleveland, the Detroit, the Chicago, the Pittsburgh, the Youngstown, the Indianapolis. It's where all the heavy industry was. And in mid to late 1944, German industrial production actually increased. So this is the key area. If you eliminate it, Germany's literally got nothing left. And so when this happens, when the Germans are encircled, this is exactly what Patton was hoping for at the Fliegers Gap. This is actually, before that, what Patton and Montgomery, the two prima donnas, advocated for. Now we've got everybody trapped. They can go nowhere. Essen, Dortmund, Hamm, all right, Cologne, everything is surrounded. They've got nothing left. And Hitler sends out one of his last fanatical psychopathic communiques saying, look, withdraw under pain of death. You will not surrender. You will not back up. You will stay and you will fight. So Model has no choice but to stay with his men and fight it out until they are all dead. Now, several generals were sent to try and break through, to try and get support to Model, but the complete surrounding of this industrial corridor had bisected the German armies. Nobody had enough strength to get through. And General Gustav von Zolgen and the 15th Panzer Army, a veteran, powerful Panzer Army, they just took off and left, said, boom, done, we're out, peace, all right? We can do nothing here. And so we get to the tiny village of Paderborn, where the SS had one of their Hitler Youth, like graduate school training facilities. And there were 60 Panther and Tiger tanks, kind of the last power that Nazi Germany had in the East. And they were hurled into battle to try and slow down Courtney Hodges. However, we've got this new breed of Hellcat tank destroyers. Patton and Simpson and Collins have these things. 105 millimeter guns. They could travel at 50 miles per hour. They were like a tank, but they traveled faster and had a heavier gun, lightly armored, but quicker and more powerful gun. And they boxed the Germans in a rectangle about 75 miles long by about 35 miles wide. They began to walk in the tank destroyers and the American artillery, and they literally just blow up everything in their path. About 317,000 of the last A-grade, really good German troops surrender. They just call it a day, like, nope, we're done, no mas ist not gut, all right? And they surrender with 30 generals. This is a bigger prize of prisoners of war and generals than even the Russians captured at Stalingrad. So you've got over a third of a million soldiers are now out of it. Here's a good Hellcat tank destroyer. It's like a giant dump truck, this big cannon, not really heavily armed, but man, it really packed a punch. And finally, we had something that could take out German tanks from a distance. Didn't really want to go toe-to-toe, but from a distance, the tank destroyer was awesome. So here are the Tigers and the Panthers at Paderborn. Here's some of the Hitler Youth lined up to be a last ditch defense, and it is all done. And it's at this time where this is one of my favorite photographs. You have the German armies marching down the middle of the Autobahn, and you can see they're in good order. They're marching in step. Their ranks are tight, and they are marching to surrender to the Allied armies. There were so many guys, the Allies couldn't handle them. Is it not good? We want to surrender. Well, keep going, buddy. Keep going. We didn't have anywhere to put these guys, let alone feed them. It got so bad that we had 1 or 2 GIs guarding a prisoner of war cage of several thousand guys. We had to rearm some German officers to guard their own men. And I've talked to several of these guys, and they say they were astonished. So it's a great photograph as they saw tank and jeep and 2.5-ton truck. They said, oh my God, we were told you guys didn't have this stuff. It was like North Korean propaganda in the modern day. We saw just vehicle after vehicle after vehicle as they were marching on foot and in horse-drawn carts. Remember, Schuler rode back to report the Remagen Bridge on a bicycle. They go, man, we just don't know, kind of like going back to the Battle of the Bulge when Jock and Piper saw that chocolate cake. How do we defeat something like this? So Model, who had been a field marshal, was very, very, very critical of General von Paulus at Stalingrad, who surrendered, who said no way should a field marshal ever be captured. And so, it's a couple days from now, I think today's Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, April 18th, Model walks out into a small wood, loyal to Hitler to the end. He shoots himself, and he commits suicide. And so now we've got to talk about a couple other things, and that is the bombing of Germany. British Vice Air Marshal Arthur Tedder, guys like Hap Arnold and Carl Spaatz in the United States Army Air Force thought bombing Germany could bring an end to the war. And strategic bombing, as I demonstrated back when we were in the classroom, if I want to bomb my projector, I start bombing here and I boom, 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 and I stop bombing about 10 yards beyond. Everything in the middle is kind of fair game. Well, it was actually more deadly being in the air in a B-24 or a B-17 than being on the ground because of German flak. But a new invention of external fuel tanks could be mounted to the P-51 Mustang, the fastest internal combustion engine of an airplane in World War II, flying at about 525 miles per hour and with 8 50 caliber machine guns on it, or P-47 Thunderbolts. These external fuel tanks gave the fighters greater range. They could escort the bombers in, drop their fuel tanks, and keep flying. This allows the bombers to go deeper and deeper into Germany. And we're going to pick up in the city of Cologne, in this kind of like the Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, Pittsburgh of Germany. It was bombed 22 times, and the place was blown to bits. The only thing that survived was the massive Cologne Cathedral, which was one of the bombers' landmarks. It was one of their aiming points. Also in this area is the famous city of Dresden and the Dresden firebombing. Now, Dresden was bombed many times, but during the 13th, 14th, and 15th of April, things really get bad, as German propaganda says that the city was needlessly firebombed. That is not true. There were, that we know of, 127 factories, military factories, and a major railroad in Dresden, so it's a legitimate target. And so Sir Arthur Harris of the Royal Air Force is blamed for the firebombing. Well, the British bombed at night, we bombed during the day. It kind of goes back and forth day and night over 3 or 4 days, the American and Royal Air Force. One of the bombings, however, will cause things to catch on fire. Many of the people had gone underground into bomb shelters, and when the city caught on fire, a super vacuum happened where it sucked up all of the oxygen and suffocated several thousand people. It is a horrible thing. It is ghastly, but it was not wantonly. It was not just a civilian target that was wantonly bombed. It was a legit military target. Doesn't make it any better, I guess, for the common Joe Schmo, but this is what is now happening to Germany that hasn't happened ever before. And to note that Dresden was defended by nearly 1 million men. Right? If you contrast that with Erwin Rommel, he had 500,000 soldiers to defend Normandy during the landings. But Dresden and Germany plays a large role. First of all, the Luftwaffe had been pretty much shot out of the sky. So there was no offensive bombing of American and Allied infantry units. Number two, a lot of the firepower, the 88 millimeter cannons that could have staved it off, maybe the crossing of the Rhine, were needed to defend Germany. So here's where air power is, paying its freight. It's carrying its load. 900,000 men and thousands of anti-aircraft guns, are defending Germany, right? When they could have been put in the offensive again. Rommel only had 500,000 guys in Normandy. But this is the point where we see the only sighting of the Messerschmitt 262. Now, the P-51 was formidable, but the ME-262 flies at 1,000, maybe 1,100 miles per hour. The guys that saw it said, oh my God, it looked like a pilot was flying on angel's wings. And it shoots even the formidable P-51 out of the sky. Problem is the ME-262s only had about 20 to 30 minutes of gasoline. And they had to land, and that was all they had. We'll get back to them shortly. So if you're flying over Germany, I'm going to begin bombing here. Boom, 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 boom. This may be my target. And I'll begin bombing here. The massive B-17s, the flying fortresses and the B-24 Liberators are bringing the fight now to Germany. Here's the Cologne Cathedral. I don't know if you guys can see it. If you look through here and all around here, nothing else has a roof. It is completely blown to bits and destroyed except for the cathedral and this little building attached right here, bringing the fight to Germany. Now, unfortunately, this is going to be Dresden. You can see the little streetcar here after it's burned. Here are some of the people trapped in the streets. Scores more underground, and the hideous firebombing of Dresden. But shortly after that, on April 4th, just a couple weeks ago, the 4th Armored Division, the guys who landed at Utah Beach, quickly come into the concentration camps. And we had heard of these things and rumored of them, but nobody had seen one. And so near the little town of Landsberg, it is the famous Easy Company, the 506 Parachute Infantry that founds the first small concentration camp in the town of Ohrdorf, very close to Landsberg. And when they got there, it was a group of scouts that saw it, and they really didn't know how to process it. So they ran back and they got the famous legendary Dick Winters, who comes up and he sees it. He calls Colonel Bob Sink and says, Colonel Sink, you got to come here and look at this. Well, Dick, you got to tell me what it is. He's like, sir, I can't. You have to come and see it for yourself. Colonel Sink shows up, and before you know it, the big three of Eisenhower, Patton, and Bradley show up. When Patton saw what was going on here, he throws up. Patton was a tough, crusty guy. The mayor, the Burgermeister and his wife, Patton sent them. They said, 9-9, this is not true, this is not good. Well, Patton makes them walk through. When they see it, they break down and cry. They say they didn't know what was going on. They both go home and hang themselves. And Patton orders the rest of the town, every kid above the age of 10 to 80 goes out and cleans up the camp. And then everything starts to, what the heck is that? Everything starts to come apart. On the 10th we find Nordhausen. On the 11th is Buchenwald, one of the largest concentration camps was liberated. And there is where we find the grotesque, sadistic figure of Ilsa Cook, the commandant's wife, who had taken the tattooed serial numbers of the inmates and stitched them together to make lampshades. A completely sadistic person. Nordhausen was liberated, and as we get into Nordhausen, this one was liberated by the British. It was a V2 rocket factory, and we were found that the people were suffering from dysentery and diarrhea, and 150 inmates a day died as they were forced to work in these conditions on the assembly line. And then we get to the other side of Germany. We're on the 15th, right about today, Bergen-Belsen was liberated, one of the worst concentration camps for malnutrition and starvation, let alone the crematoriums. And a lot of these camps were put out in the east, out in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, so people had deniability. And then it was on April 29th where a great book, a good friend of Chapel Hill High School, Alex Kershaw, wrote a book called The Liberator. It's going to be made into a Netflix special here where, one of his officers, Felix Sparks, leads men into Dachau, just outside of West Germany. And I just gotta pause for a second. I myself got into a little bit of trouble here, just a few miles outside of Munich, where as we went through the museum, you could see in the pictures there was this little ranch house across the street with like green shingles and green shutters, and it was in this picture where the camp was built for 2,000 people, and at its height it had 200,000. And I was doing some filming, and this lady came up to me and was like, "Oh, you Americans think you know everything." And I got into a shouting match with her as she said, "We didn't know." I'm like, "Lady, that house in that photo is frickin' right there. Don't tell me you didn't know, just the smell alone." And so, sorry to get a little emotional here, but that was what was going on. It was just outside the big city of Munich, the home of Oktoberfest, which is one of my bucket list items out, but I'll never forget that argument in Dachau. And when the soldiers see this, it kind of renews the Allied army's vigor to end the war. This is what we have to do. So here is Patton, here is Bradley. They're looking on, they're going, "Are you freaking kidding me?" You can see all the MPs and some of the inmates here. Can you believe that this is really going on? And it was. And so here's some of the pictures of Dachau with the 10-foot ceilings and the crematoriums. If you guys ever get over there, I know it's hard, but you have to go and take a look. These are stories that just need to be told and remembered. And so speaking of that, this is my wife, beautiful wife Laura, and I, and we are in Amsterdam, one of the cities that is not high on my list, but if I would ever go back, I would go back to this place. Get your tickets early. This is the famous Anne Frank house, and this is the oak tree that Anne mentions looking through her window when she was in hiding. And I am a great rule follower. I try to follow the rules. But this one time it says no photos. You pull back this bookcase, and this is the secret stairwell. It's the only photo I took. A lady saw me. She was about to rage on me. I told her who I was and what I was doing, and I put my camera away. She kind of gave me a wink and a head nod, saying it was okay. It was for educational purposes. So clearly, if you don't get your tickets early, which is not that hard, you have to wait in this crazy long line. I felt really bad. We cut right to the front, kind of like a fast pass, but take your time in there, and it is awesome. And this comes to the good stuff. April 12th, right about now, Bradley's 12th Army is splitting Germany into sections. All right, he's going one way, to a little bit to the east and to the north. Patton is being sent towards the south to meet Russians and the Elbe River. And then someone said, wait a minute, person we don't really want to have to interact with the Russians is George, because he's always going off about how bad communism is. And so other army groups begin to get occupational duties. We are here, we are going to stay, and we're going to hold on to this territory. And so the race comes in here for Bradley's 2nd Army and part of the 83 Infantry Division, who calls themselves the Ragtag Army. They're racing for the Elbe River, and they're going hard. They're gobbling up 50, 60, 70 miles a day, and they get to the city of Magdeburg after covering 73 miles in one day. And they said every now and then we would come to resistance and we would just overwhelmingly destroy it. They ran out of gas. American vehicles ran out of gas. So you'll see here in a second, they commandeered vehicles and they spray painted like a white American star on them, and they kept going east to get to the Elbe River, an astonishing 73 miles in one day. This is more than even Patton's run across the south of France way back in July and August. And here they are going hard. Here's one of the commandeered vehicles, missing a fender. We're going to just spray paint a star on it, and we are going to go. We are going to get there first. And this is a great photo. We're going to talk about it in a second here. I wanted to draw your attention to this guy right here. He is a Chapelhillian named Edgar Bud Parsons. These are Soviets, and if you go to the National World War II Memorial on the Washington Mall, this is the last relief on the right-hand side if the Washington Monument is at your back, and it is celebrating this actual picture with Chapelhillian lived behind down between like Phillips Middle School, Estes Hills Elementary, and like Eastgate Plaza. Just a great human being, super nice guy. Well, the Ragtag Army gets to the Elbe River, and as you can see, the bridge is completely destroyed. They're about an hour, 70 miles away from Berlin. Think about from here to Winston-Salem. And they want to keep going. But President Roosevelt, unfortunately, dies that day. So you think of right about the time I'm filming this, unfortunately, President Roosevelt dies. So everyone stops. And General William Simpson said, look, man, I know it's a terrible day. President Roosevelt's been in office for 4 terms practically. If I can get resupplied, I can be in Berlin in just 2 or 3 days. I will beat the Soviets to it. And Bradley says, no, that's not what the President and General Eisenhower want. So he flies to see Bradley. Come on, Brad, let me go. I got this. And again, he was told no. So, 2nd Lieutenant William Robinson, who is an intelligence and reconnaissance officer, is told to paint a tablecloth he takes out of a German house. He paints it like the American flag, and he crawls, walking, dodging, slithering on his stomach. He crawls across this bridge along with my man, Captain Edgar Bud Parsons, and he meets Soviets and their counterparts on the other side. Are you, American? Hey, we're Americans, we're here. What are you Americans? Are you sure you are not in disguise? We are Russians from Mother Russia, Union Soviet Socialist Republic. Hey, Kratsky. Oh, well, they pop up and they join together. Bud Parsons shakes the hand. It comes into play in the Cold War, another story for another time. And they had a massive party there right along the Elbe River. Now, Hitler, realizing things were in trouble, tells his SS to go into the mountains of southern Germany and Austria and fight like werewolves, fight guerrilla warfare. And so at this time, going south of Munich to a place, I recommend it, it's creepy, but everyone has to go, you have 4 armies racing for what's known as the Eagle Nest. You have the 101st Airborne, led by General Maxwell Taylor. You got Patton's 3rd Army coming. You've got Alexander Patch's 7th Army coming from a different direction, and then French General Jacques Leclerc's 2nd Army. And Leclerc badly wanted to get there. And everyone was pissed, very angry that they had to wait for the French to, liberate Paris way back in July. This was not going to happen. So General Taylor sends out an order, find your way up there.